Hello, I'm Kothorix, and I'm going to tell you why you should be playing ArcheAge. ArcheAge is a Korean MMORPG released in the States in 2014, and while there are a ton of Korean MMOs on the market right now, ArcheAge stands out. If you've been bored with World of Warcraft clones lately, logging on only to have nothing to do, you need to try a sandbox MMO. Well, a good place to start talking about ArcheAge is with the classes, as it's one of the first things you'll decide on. There are 10 classes in ArcheAge, but you choose 3 of them in any combination to make your initial character. That means there are 120 possible class combinations. Not only that, but each class is something of a simple talent tree. Sound a little intimidating? Well, don't worry, because it's pretty easy and cheap to switch between classes. And while there are certain combinations that are more viable for PvP or PvE than others, ultimately you can decide exactly how you want to play. The great thing about ArcheAge is that you only really need one character. You don't need to make a bunch of alts to experience other classes or styles of play. Okay, so what about the combat? Well, combat is a typical tab target style that is used in most MMOs. That might make some of you groan, but ArcheAge does it really well. Almost every attack in the game causes some kind of status effect that can be comboed into another effect. These combos are not necessarily class-based, meaning that multiple people can work together to chain combos on enemies, or you can combine your 3 class trees in such a way as to do the combos yourself. It's very fast-paced, with movement and positioning being very important, making it feel almost like action combat, and honestly I prefer it over the kind of action combat in games like Terra or WildStar. A fair warning though, the game does start out just like a theme park MMO. You'll be going from quest hub to quest hub, doing basic kill and fetch quests, but after about level 30 or so, about the time you get your first boat, the world really opens up. And I think it's just to introduce you to the concepts of the game before letting you loose in the world. Now if you're like me, you're probably thinking, do whatever you want sounds like a cop-out by the developers so they don't have to put in real content. ArcheAge actually has a lot of structure and content, especially challenging in-game dungeons, raids, and 100-man world bosses, which drop some of the best gear in the game. What many people look forward to at the end of a game is the gear grind. Well, ArcheAge offers several ways to get it. You can go the traditional route and end up doing dungeons and raids, but if you don't have a big guild, you can also search for rare drops, though you'll be spending a lot of time grinding. Or you can craft gear. Unlike most MMOs, crafted gear in ArcheAge is how you obtain the absolute best gear in the game, though it's probably the most difficult route to go. You can make a living in the game just crafting gear. You never have to set foot in a dungeon. On top of that, crafting gear grants experience. It is possible to get to max level just from crafting. I love crafting in this game because it feels meaningful at every level. Low-level crafting is used as materials for high-level crafting, which means you'll never be wasting money crafting gear for yourself while leveling up. Now, what if you aren't really about the gear grind? Well, there's plenty else to do as well. ArcheAge is a giant open world, meaning that there are no loading screens anywhere, except for when you go into a dungeon. There aren't even loading screens when traveling from one continent to another. In fact, if you like the idea of sailing, you'll like ArcheAge. You can travel freely by personal boat across the entire ocean. If you have the money, buy a larger ship, gather a crew, and just explore. You don't like dungeons and exploration? Well, there's plenty of PvP too. ArcheAge is all about world PvP. There are 2 factions in ArcheAge, the Westerners, which are humans and elves, and the Easterners, which are Asians and furries. Yeah. Anyway, PvP is essentially always active between the factions. You will run into PvP situations quite a bit, which can be a fun distraction from whatever it is you're doing. If you like to be more trolly, you can even turn on your own faction and kill friendly players, though there is some consequence for it. If PvP's not your thing, there's ways to avoid it too. Low-level zones usually have PvP disabled, and you only get honor from killing players on the opposing faction if a PvP zone is at war, so player killers tend to stick to those areas. And PvP is meaningful in this game. I don't mean that you lose all your gear when you die or permadeath or anything hardcore like that. What I mean is it's worked in to have a role in the game. You know how I spoke about sailing earlier? Well, you can be literal pirates. You can sail around with a crew, killing and stealing the ships of others. Don't worry though, they won't get your ship permanently. It does disappear after a good while and go back to you. There's also something called a trade pack, a bundle of trade goods that are a droppable item by your character that other players may try to kill you for. Turning in these trade packs at various vendors gives you gold and other trade goods, especially if you run them in a ship across the ocean. This is where the game gets really interesting, planning a course to take you from one continent to the other while trying to avoid pirates who will steal your ship and trade goods. There are other kinds of PvP as well. There are a few zones that act like open battlegrounds. There are castles that guilds can own and other guilds can try to take from them. As mentioned, there are PvP battles over trade packs, either on land or on sea. There are even PvP battles over good grinding spots. This is how sandbox open world PvP is supposed to be. Do crafting, gearing, and PvP still not interest you? Well, there are other skills. Farming has its place in ArcheAge. You can own your own house or farm, which takes up actual space in the world. You know those trade packs I talked about? Well, most of the materials come from planting, growing, and harvesting crops. You can also use those materials for cooking to grant buffs or restore HP and mana. And there's also animal husbandry, essentially breeding animals for rare pets and mounts. There are also skills you've probably never seen in a game before, like the ability to compose and play music, though you will make some mistakes if your skill isn't high enough. There are a ton of non-combat skills in ArcheAge. I spoke earlier about there being consequences for killing players of your own faction. Well, you can go to jail in the game. If you commit certain crimes, you'll start to rack up crime points. When you get enough and you're killed, you go to court. The court is run by players. 5 randomly selected players can opt in to serve as jurors. They can see what crimes players committed and ask them about it. If they feel like the actions of the accused were justified, they can rule him innocent and he's free to go. But they can also vote to put him in jail, the time of which is decided by the severity of his crimes. Usually it's between 15 minutes and an hour of actual time, and you need to be logged in to serve out your jail sentence. Furthermore, if a person ends up in jail too often, they will be kicked out of the faction. In ArcheAge, there is essentially a third faction of factionless players. We call this the pirate faction because typically they roll around open waters trying to murder everyone and take their trade packs. One of the biggest reasons to play ArcheAge is because the game is completely free. It doesn't hurt to try it. You can pay $15 a month for a type of membership that gives a few options, but it's not really necessary until you get to a higher level. And that brings me to the cash shop. The cash shop is kind of a problem in ArcheAge. It really pushes what people would consider pay to win. Now, most of it is normal cash shop items like cosmetics, but there are several things that you can't get in the game normally that you'll probably want. These aren't equipment exactly, more like luck-enhancing items, special mounts, or special gliders, things like that. Most people's biggest issue with the cash shop, though, is that you can sell items you get there for in-game gold on the auction house, and then use that gold to buy better crafted items. Most of the wealthy players and well-equipped players have done this. Essentially, they've turned real-life money into in-game gold. Most people would consider this pay to win. However, some people would say, myself included, that it isn't really pay to win and it's more of a pay to grind less. You definitely have pay to win players, but the game itself isn't necessarily pay to win. You can't directly buy high tier equipment with real life money because most of it is crafted, or comes from dungeons. So you're either grinding the materials out yourself or paying someone else to. What I would consider pay to win is if the only way to get high tier items was to pay real life money for them. But this isn't the case with ArcheAge. However you look at it is up to you. But on the other hand, having cash shop items be placeable on the auction house does allow players to use in-game gold to pay for a monthly subscription. In fact, since tokens you get daily just for having a subscription can be used to buy items that sell well, your month-to-month subscription pretty much pays for itself, which is pretty cool. If you're high enough level or geared enough, you can easily grind out enough gold to buy another month's subscription. Speaking of grinding, the game is very grindy. At low levels, it isn't a problem, there are plenty of quests to do. But once you get to max level, in order to craft anything useful, you'll need to do tons of farming for materials. Like I said before, this is only one of the ways to get in-game items though. Grinding is more of a solo route to getting gear, while doing dungeons and raids is for group-oriented players. Now, other than the cash shop and the grind, there are 2 things you might hear people complain about. The first is labor points. Aside from combat, just about every action in the game requires labor points to perform. You only get a certain amount of labor per day, and it slowly regenerates in real time. The obvious downside is that you can only do so much crafting or gearing at a time. There are potions that restore labor, but these are bought off the cash shop. Players do post them on the auction house, but they're usually too expensive to be worth using. Once you're out of labor, pretty much all you can do is grinding PvP or daily quests. However, there is a good side to labor. Remember those potions that are so expensive? Well, it's because labor is such a limited resource, meaning that actions you perform requiring labor, such as crafting, have a value beyond that of the materials used. This means that typically, crafted items are more valuable than the materials they're made out of. ArcheAge is the only game where I've seen this to be the case. Labor also limits the amount of time a day people can spend increasing their non-combat skills, meaning that having high skills is valuable in itself. The other main complaint about the game is the random number generator, which people refer to as RNG. The RNG is used for just about everything. For example, when you craft items, you might not necessarily get the type you're going for. If you aim to make leather boots, you'll still get leather boots, but they will have semi-random stats, Sometimes great, sometimes garbage. The RNG is also used when regrading items. Basically, you can pay a moderate amount of money for a scroll that has a chance to increase an item's base stats by about 5 to 10%. The higher you get an item, the less likely it is to go up another grade, and the more likely it is to downgrade or disappear entirely. And it's all random. This is one of the biggest money sinks in the game, but once you have in-game items, it's about the only thing you can do to further upgrade your gear. If you plan on playing this game seriously, you'll be doing a lot of regrading. There are a few other minor complaints about the game that I have, though they're mostly about the community. Because of the freedoms that ArcheAge gives, a lot of players are kind of assholes. They will troll you, scam you, kill you for no reason, that kind of thing. The game is also very political. Guilds have long-standing feuds and alliances. People will pay off jurors to say that they are innocent and avoid jail. People will make alts to serve as spies in the enemy faction or guilds. And while some of this behavior does annoy me, I also like the fact that the game is freeform enough for it to exist. And that's why I play ArcheAge. It's a true sandbox experience. If you're sick of World of Warcraft clones and garbage-free MMOs that lack the quality of a paid experience, ArcheAge might be for you. If you've watched anime like Sword Art Online or Log Horizon, and you've been longing for an online game that you can have that level of freedom, ArcheAge just might be your thing. All I can say is give it a try. And hey, if you want to contact me in the game, I'm on the eastern side of the Olo server. I hope to see you there. Anyway, I'm Kothorix, and thanks for watching. If you liked this video, remember to subscribe to see more like it. And if you didn't like it, well, feel free to tell me why in the comments.